So, Danny Treacy, thanks for sitting and talking with me today. Welcome to Airspace, it's really great to have you here. And really just wanted to talk a little bit about you and your practice, how you came to be working with us at Airspace, what we're doing here, and where we hope it might go in the future. I think you first came to our attention because you submitted a series of photographs for a project that we were doing in 2017-18 called the Brownfield Research Centre, and you sent us a series of, maybe I think there were 8 sheer black backgrounds with some what looked like alien forms, multicoloured in various shapes, but all looked fairly like alien creatures. And on closer inspection were assemblages of discarded clothes. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that series is called Those, and it's precisely that. It's all made entirely from clothing, and clothes that were retrieved from sites. And my focus was on the items of clothing that had been there for so long that had started to take on board their kind of characteristics of natural forms, so that the clothing had gone kind of shades of green and brown, and moss had taken hold of it, and it had started to decompose. And the more I worked with it, the more it started to resemble kind of natural life forms. So that was something that I was working with, and something to do with the very sort of fleeting time spent in the environment by the people who had left the clothing, but also with each other, because I gauged from the clothing that a lot of it was the fallout of human contact, in certain spaces. And so I wanted to sort of reference that, and the forms that I made had a kind of reference to natural forms, but also a reference to human body parts and genitalia in particular. Quite subtle, I think. But they did end up looking quite human as well. Sorry, quite alien as well.
Definitely.
It was like seed pods or eggs and that kind of thing.
I think we'll come back to that particular project a bit later on, because there's something really interesting about not only about your image making process, but also the bit that leads up to that, in your investigation of site and stuff. But when we got those through, I thought, I know that name. I know Danny Treacy, and I've got at home, I'm sure loads of people have got a big Phaidon photography book called Pi, I think.
Vitamin pH.
Vitamin pH. That was it. And I remember that there's an image of yours in there which similarly has a sheer black background with a really striking. I can't remember
I think it was the beginning of that series. Actually.
Okay,
I think it was because I think Phaidon got in touch with me. I was recommended for that book or nominated, whatever. But it was for a body of work called Them, which is where I'm wearing clothing that's also been discarded from different environments and different spaces. So they're kind of full-size portraits. And then I had a conversation with the editors at Phaidon, and they were happy for me to show more recent work as well. So at that time, it was really in its infancy. That the body of work called Those, which kind of comes from Them as well.
Yeah.
That was his first airing, I think.
Okay. So going right the way back, where did your practice begin? How do you describe yourself as a photographer?
No, not really. I always think photographer feels kind of inappropriate for me in a way, because I don't always engage with the materials or my practice through a lens. A lot of the time that does happen, but I'd feel that the camera comes kind of on board usually in the latter stages, almost as a kind of final thing. But I think I don't. Of course, that you could say that about lots of photography. Of course, there has to be a photograph taken, and photographers do that. But I think that my process begins with something much more akin to kind of archaeology, basically. I think I've spoken to lots of people about this, people who anthropologists. I thought maybe my work was anthropology at one point, and this anthropologist said, actually, it's kind of more like archaeology, because you're treating the world as if there's nobody around, as if there's nobody, there.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so it's almost as if I'm kind of dealing with the lost civilization or something, which is really interesting and quite strange because I guess it highlighted there's a certain distance in my work, and that's not really intentional. I guess it's because a lot of the sort of people that I'm working with, by proxy through their clothing, are to a certain extent kind of invisible, and not really in our vision, because the activities I'm interested in, that the communities and the people usually engage in, are kind of nocturnal or are quite illicit or are just kind of in a space that is not really inhabited on a day-to-day basis. So I have to go and actively look for these spaces, basically. And that's why I think there's a certain kind of almost vacuum there, or a certain sense of them being not present, which is kind of interesting, yeah. But something also, I don't want it for the result to feel sort of cold or sterile. I want there to be a certain, kind of warmth to the work, and a certain tenderness and intimacy as well.
So would it be fair to say, I mean, obviously the lens and the camera comes into the process maybe towards the end of it.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a real interest in sight and place, which is at the start of it. But would it be fair to say that what you're really looking for is the inhabitation or the activity, which you'll never see because it's happened without your presence or without your knowledge, but in terms of that archaeology, you're digging up evidence of activity and inhabitation in the site?
Not really, because I don't want to sound like elusive or anything, because I think I could participate in that really easily if I wanted to, and I could witness it, because I know when the activity takes place, I know where it takes place, I know the individuals, not on a personal level, but I recognise them. But
what is the specific activity there?
Well, there's many. It's widespread. It could be sexual activity. It could be people coming together in a space at a certain time to kind of hang out, to sort of congregate, to spend time. Maybe because that's the only space they feel safe in or feel comfortable in or have access to. And of course I could go there and witness that, but I choose not to. I think out of respect, out of the fact that I'm not part of that community, and I don't want to, kind of like enforce myself in that space at all. Or I don't want to become a voyeur either. I'm not interested in seeing these people or the acts. I'm interested in what that represents, what the fact that you have to go to a certain place because the other places are not accessible. I'm interested in what that represents about that community and about our attitude towards certain communities as well. So I think, going back to your question, it's not about partaking or witnessing or seeing, it's more about illustrating through materials the fact that there is something other than the mainstream, the thing that most people sign up for, and the thing that people hold as values and valuable and important. There is another thing as well, and I think it's really important not to devalue that other thing.
Sure.
The other activity and the other communities,
but it's your digging and your archaeology of site which is evidence of that activity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you go on to work with the materials that you find and repurpose them in order to, I guess, to show that the non-mainstream activity is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I actually do treat those materials and those objects with a kind of sense of them being quite precious, I think, because they are
reverence.
Yeah, exactly. Then they are important artifacts or important items.
Do you want to give us an example of what those items?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that I think is really important about them is that the fact that they're constantly in flux. So an item of clothing, for example, it may have a kind of an existence in a space that might be a few days before it gets maybe taken away or maybe kind of removed because it's seen as litter, or it might be there for a few weeks or months, depends on what it's made up of. Something like an aluminium drinks can could be there for decades because aluminium doesn't tend to go anywhere. Steel, on the other hand, will rust, so steel disappears. And at the kind of like in the sort of space of extreme fragility and constant movement, we have used condoms, which are not really materials I would ever previously have kind of considered, really, because now, of course, they're abject and they are, you know, potentially toxic and potentially hazardous, but because of the nature of the condom and the material, it's designed to kind of disintegrate and designed to, you know, to be fragile. So it is extremely fragile. And I was in a place where I was constantly seeing these things, but constantly ignoring them, because we're all trained to have a certain sense of what is valuable and what is worthless. Mm-hmm. And I, of course, have been trained in that way as well. And I'm not trying to in any way say that waste is a good thing, or litter is somehow, you know, positive. But I think it's really important to try and get past blanket kind of dismissing everything that could be seen as litter from a distance, because I think actually what it can be in certain instances, and that's the instances that I'm interested in and my work functions around, is when that waste or that litter, that material, becomes something that's really relevant to a certain community, and it can actually become a type of marker, a marker of territory, a marker of time spent, a marker of joy, a marker of celebration, marching, you know, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was interested because we talked about the used condom, and, you know, obviously that invokes a bit of, probably quite a bit of disgust in lots of people.
Yeah.
And my assumption was it was just the throwaway detritus of a particular act. But you were telling me that sometimes they are, or often they are, placed particularly and on purpose in order to territorialise a space.
Yeah, absolutely. Used condoms, and also the tissues that are used to, you know, to wipe as well. Yeah, they're kind of strewn, basically. You know, so you can see there's an active kind of marking of a place, strewn into bushes, onto trees, into branches, and it almost becomes, when I first started to see these places, when I was I'm still working in an area of forest that's you know, known as a cruising ground, which is obviously then being designated and labelled in a way that I think is actually really unhelpful. You know, I think it's reductive, basically. But anyway, this space that I was really interested in, they became this area where the activity clearly takes place. It became extremely intense because of all of this material, and it becomes almost like a little kind of sort of decorated tree almost, you know, like a bit like a Christmas tree. It becomes, you know, decorated with used condoms, and there's something kind of incredibly bizarre about that, but also extremely enticing, and because there's a certain kind of beauty to this thing as well, in a strange way. But of course, you have to navigate that, and you have to sort of think, well, what is it that this thing means? Because of course, there's a load of objection that comes with it as well, you know, and there can be feces in the area as well, you know.
But it's the intention that lies behind it which seems fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, they're not there by accident.
No, absolutely.
They're placed for a reason.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that you know, that this area has a reputation, but so it's important that the reputation is upheld. So it's important that the territory is claimed by the communities who use it. And I think one way of claiming that and keeping other people out is by marking it, and also maybe it's a kind of some sort of a safety net there as well, because I know that there's lots of instances of homosexual men being attacked by other men, and I think that maybe sometimes that those kind of the markers are there to signal the space and to sort of keep people out, I think. You know? And also, of course, to alert other men who are interested in that activity that this is the place to be, basically. You know, so I think it's a really kind of interesting sort of space where there's no kind of, you know, clear defined paths or formulas or rules. It's very much something that you actually have to kind of navigate with your senses, and it's a very non-verbal space as well. You know, for all of the people who are participating there, it's all about posture and kind of eye contact. So I think it's really interesting because obviously then the signs and the symbols are part of that contact and part of that communication as well.
And the ritual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So on a studio visit down to your place in London, off the back of you sending these images in to us for the Brownfield project, I was particularly struck by a set of images that you produced in the forest that you were working in around the cruising grounds. And we'll put a link, if we can, to these works into the onto the YouTube page.
Sure.
And from memory, they were black and white, large format images of bundles of clothes, almost in some sense of human form, hanging by nooses from trees, and it really made me stop and think about the castigation of this section of society.
Yeah.
And what was that series?
Yeah, well, that was kind of the beginning, I guess, of this body of work that's collective territories, really, where it's recognising that there is a space that is a territory that you're not part of, and responding to that, really, and responding by using a kind of a vehicle that I'm very familiar with, which is clothing, because clothing is something that is incredibly important in that place as well. The way in which people dress, the types of clothing that are worn are really relevant there. So the clothing that's been discarded is also quite prolific there. So I started to collect that and started to work with it. And my idea really about the shapes was to kind of to work with the idea of assemblage, really, to kind of create these bundles and to sort of hang them from the trees within the forest to really reference the space, the space that facilitates the activity, because it's very dense space. It's almost like you're going down these little kind of warrens of holly bushes that open out then into a small kind of cul-de-sac where there's usually a tree where the activity takes place. So it was these trees, these little cul-de-sacs that I was really interested in. Very kind of intense space, and very it's kind of like a heightened sense of awareness of the activity as well, which I really liked. So I'd create these bundles, these assemblages in my studio from the clothing from that place, which is really important for me in my practice. It's really important that whatever I reference, it kind of relates to the place as well. The place, and the activity are united. And then I would often find belts and kind of like tights and things that have been used as part of the sexual act, and they were used then to kind of like to sort of hold and to suspend the clothing. And then you picked up on that straight away about them being almost like kind of torsos.
Could you use thick rope to
in some kind I think at that stage it changed depending on what type of rope I came across. Because I'd usually use one set of clothes and one piece of rope, and then discard that, once I'd photographed it. Not in the forest, but actually, get rid of it, and then move on. So each piece of sort of tie or piece of rope was different usually. And I'd also sometimes position them on branches, resting, kind of sitting on branches or sitting on the floor at the base of the trees as well. So it was a mixture of dangling and sitting and kind of just being suspended basically in different ways.
But for you, the focus of those images was the space, really, not so much the object, or
both really, but both
how they were
like 50-50, really, the two are so interdependent, I think.
And so from there we started talking about a project in airspace. And this residency was supposed to happen a while ago.
And Easter, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. Easter, and of course COVID-19 has scuppered lots of things, or made us at least try and reconfigure how we do things. So so what we decided to do was to take the 6-week residency offer, and we split it into two. And so there was a first part, 3 weeks that you did remotely from here in London, and we're now at the start of part 2, 3 weeks. So I guess maybe tell us a little bit about
But
what about collective territories?
Yeah,
and a little bit behind that, and then what you did with that first 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, I think it was, as you mentioned, that the plans were potentially going to be put on hold indefinitely, weren't they? I think then we had a sort of email conversation, and you asked me if I felt that there was any way this could go ahead, or maybe we should just hold off. And what I came to understand, because of coronavirus and because of lockdown in particular, was a need for engagement with places. I listen to BBC Radio London on a daily basis, and all of the conversations, all of the kind of the anxiety started to come around this kind of 1 hour period of exercise that you got, and it seemed so important, and that was something that
it seems like a world away now.
I know,
that hour
1 hour
a day was crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I hadn't considered before in terms of engagement, with other people. I'd always been aware, of course, that my own practice relies heavily on the act of walking, and it's nothing to do with walking, in a kind of rambling way. It's walking because the speed, the proximity to the ground, all of that kind of stuff, the ability to climb through a fence, jump over a wall, walk through some trees.
Stop immediately.
Exactly.
And investigate.
Yeah. All that you can't do it in a car. You can't do it on a bike even. So all of my engagement is done on foot, and so with the residency in mind, and also I should mention that the idea of a residency is something that I'm always kind of suspicious of, really, because I think with my work in particular, obviously I'm just speaking about myself, my suspicions from my own practice. It's really important that if I'm going to make work personally that is about any other person, any other people, anything, I need to know that I'm in the right place, and that only comes about from time spent in that place. And a type of kind of observation, almost like ethnographic observation, basically, based on items of clothing or based on objects.
But the need to be on site. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, they need to be on site, and it's not good enough to do it through secondary internet research. It's not good enough to do it through Google Maps. It just doesn't work, I don't think.
So we were asking you to come and do a 6-week residency in Stoke, and almost feed the city through the prism of your practice. Allow you some time to test and experiment. That's what all of these residencies are about, and to just some time with your practice, but to use Stoke, a new city to you, as a testing ground, really, and that instantly became impossible because you weren't allowed to be here.
Absolutely, and I think
and I should quickly say that another point of our residency program here is to try and reduce the gap between the public and the artist, and the public and the gallery, and to create ways to reconnect there. And also that was going to be impossible because you couldn't be here.
Exactly.
Too. So we, between us, we went about trying to build a small group of people here in Stoke, who I guess were your eyes and ears on the ground.
I mean, basically. It's a form of research, ultimately, it's a form of kind of very, very intense research, actually, because you're engaging with a very small group of people, and you're hearing their stories. So the call out was put out in different channels, and it was about explaining my practice and explaining my I guess awareness of places that are important to people, and obviously with the context of this idea of a 1 hour daily walk, places that become much more important under that time period. So in that early,
those restrictions.
In that in sort of late spring, wasn't it really? To ask participants to think about the places that mean something to them now, And those places could be, not on any map, not on any tourist board. It's about the kind of the unseen, the unknown places that I'm really interested in. And so the call out was put out for them to, if they're interested, to get in touch and to start an email conversation. So I would ask them to give me some details about their special place, maybe some stories. It could be about a place that they're currently engaged with, or it could be about a place that they were engaged with years ago.
So you were interested in more than just the location of their place, but how it tied to them psychologically or emotionally or experientially or something.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really just about them sharing their stories of the place, and its location, but also what it means to them, basically. Now and what it meant to them years ago.
And just to reiterate, you'd never been to Stoke before, so you couldn't really get an image sense of where they were describing to you. But
no, not at all.
But I guess it did it give you a sort of a grounding or something?
Yeah.
Did it? I guess that's remote primary research.
Yeah.
You mentioned the research.
Yeah.
I guess from there you can go on and see some images to get a sense
of
what it looked like.
Yeah. Well, I think as well importantly, I kind of we both designed the call out to encourage people to respond at least 3 times and in different ways. So using text, perhaps using imagery that they would take on site, and also things such as objects. So they could then send to me. So I would send out a kind of collector's pack for them to put objects into, and they could then leave them here at the gallery or send them to me. And so it was really a way to build a picture.
And what sort of things did you get?
I got really, really interesting things that I would never have dreamt of. Kind of voice recordings from the sites, talking about memories of certain other sites. Once we start to get a bit more familiar, and the questions became more kind of elaborate, I guess, it was really interesting to see where that went in terms of what I would see about a person's relationship to a place. I'd ask, is there something about these type of places that is important to you? Because it seems like there could be. And then the conversations would then go into kind of memories about childhood that were relatable to, yes, actually there are kind of other places, and that then grows, because there's one location here that is currently valid for one participant, but then it leads to another location still within Stoke that was valid for them when they were a teenager. So this is kind of like the way in which the map kind of grew. So
okay.
I was building, and I literally had a kind of one of those Google Maps where you can kind of keep it active, and I would just put pins on different participants' locations, and then as the stories kind of grew, I'd also put pins on their other locations. And what I'd really hoped for, but it was in my sort of wildest dreams, would be that there was some kind of crossover with the participants' responses in terms of locations that meant something to them, because that for me then highlights that it's really relevant in this idea of a collective territory.
So I guess the big difference between the way of working that you've just described in this project and the way you would ordinarily work in the forest area that you're familiar with is that as you suggested before, you're very aware of the activities that go on in that site. You're very familiar with it. You know what the activities are, when they are, almost who they are. But here you're now presented with a series of places. You're remote at this stage. You're 150 miles away, and you've got no idea what the places look like, where they are, what happens there, other than the specific input you've had from each contributor. So there's a real difference in a way of working here. Yeah,
totally. And so as the information was coming in, I was obviously listening to the kind of stories and the descriptions of the place, but I was also looking through my own lens, in the images, for example, for different types of activity that might be almost kind of unrecognised by the participant as well. Because what's really important is that the participation sort of kind of highlights areas on the map. The map is the city of Stoke. So that's the first kind of checkpoint for me to understand that I'm in the right kind of place, because it's an important place for somebody at least, And then I'm looking for evidence of other participants in that place, so a kind of community basically,
Yeah.
And so that's why, when I'm going to these places now in the second stage of the residency, I'm kind of aware of the information that I've got from the participants, but I'm also looking for the other activities that I'm familiar with because of doing this for quite a number of years, and of course also you have to, when you're on a residency, you have to kind of respond immediately, you have to go with your instinct, you have to have your eyes open, you can't just try to make what you've already made before, because that just defeats the point of doing the thing in the first place. So you also have to kind of look around really, and it's actually pretty intense doing that, because you have to look and try to respond, but also be respectful and mindful of the relationship that the participant has with that place.
Sure.
And not to try and kind of devalue or change that or skew that, But it's almost as if the first stage is the kind of where the analogy of like being a kid left at the school gate. You kind of like dropped off there, and then your first day you've got to actually suss it out really. So it's like it's been amazing. It's really highlighted the fact how impossible it is in a sense to approach a city cold without some prior knowledge of it. Because this first stage is the prior knowledge that I'm in the right place, at least for a number of people.
I guess the fascinating thing for us as an organisation, though, is that you as an artist are now given an opportunity to really test your practice, because the usual familiarity of your chosen sites, or even the choice of your sites has been stripped away. So so your processes are laid bare, really, and that must be amazing to be, as you say, dropped in a site, not completely cold, because you've got some ideas of what it is, but then it's about what are your senses, what's your recognition like, and what's the application of your knowledge over the last 20 years? How does that work in this odd place?
Yeah, well, it's really refreshing actually. It's really challenging, but it's really rewarding, because you immediately start to see things differently. You're kind of constantly, of course, mentally bouncing the ideas that you have as you respond on what you already know. But you've got to kind of like push what you know as well, and just try and adapt it and try and kind of change it in some way. Like, say for example, in the body of work I'm making in the forest, I've recently been really drawn to what are known as arboglyphs, which are tree carvings, and there's a real interesting state that these things are in, because they're in a sort of flux of what they are. Are they important marks made by people, or are they graffiti on trees made with a knife? And it seems that they're only kind of like designated as important if they were made with an important year or in a certain important time frame. So for example, there's parts of, I think, a forest, like maybe the New Forest, where there was soldiers based in World War I, and a lot of them scratch their names in the trees and things, and it's that becomes an important kind of historical significance because of World War I. And I actually don't agree with that at all. That's just a person scratching their name into a tree, regardless of what year they did it.
In 100 years' time, two star-crossed lovers who scratched their names into a tree, will be as archaic.
Yeah, exactly,
and just as important.
Yeah, exactly. Some kind of American GI who happened to get stuck in a wood in Suffolk, for me, is not that interesting actually. But what is interesting is when, precisely you said about lovers, when I find a heart on a tree and two names, that kind of intensity of emotion that's really beautiful and poignant. Yeah. That for me, and these people are anonymous because we don't have a date, we don't know where they came from, we don't know what nationality they are. That for me becomes extremely much more valid, much more vital than something that you can pinpoint who it was. But we have an obsession for facts and dates and periods of time that are kind of significant, and I just don't think that's all right, because it diminishes and it excludes all of the other mark making that doesn't have that associated with it, and I think it should be the opposite. I think the challenge is to sort of see something that's about a code and a signal and a symbol in the things that we presume are useless. So a used condom, an aluminium drinks can is rubbish, I accept that, but it's not useless. It does indicate something extremely significant, and something quite poignant as well, and tender.
Yeah. Well, and it's there, so whether you agree with it or not, it doesn't stop it from being there.
Exactly.
And having a point.
And also importantly, I think it shouldn't ever. It's not ever like a judgment call about the person who left it there either. I see that quite a lot on comments when I'm doing this. This residency has actually led to some sort of kind of different types of primary research, looking at certain sites. So if I've got a site that's been highlighted by a participant, and I'm doing a bit of research of my own on that area in Stoke, there's things such as Facebook groups that belong to that certain site, and that's an interesting way for me to see the attitude towards certain types of behaviour and activities in that place, which are very the attitude can be very harsh and dismissive and aggressive, and presuming that the character of the people who might have left some rubbish there, for example. And for me, it's not as sort of clear-cut or as binary as that. You can't make those calls. So that's been really interesting, that I can, use the primary research and the kind of like conversation, the sharing as a way in, and then do a bit of extended research by looking at things like Facebook, which is kind of new to me, but it's really useful, and also looking at newspaper reports about the places that just pop up, on searches, because it shows there's a kind of tension in that place. And for me, a tension in a place is usually a good indicator that there's something happening that is much more nuanced than you'd first believe.
Yeah, and issues like littering and antisocial behaviour, they're really emotive subjects.
Totally, very emotive,
and often so emotive that people could never look behind the issues and see any value, because they are very troublesome for different people for different reasons.
Totally, and I totally accept and understand that, and I'm not trying to advocate for all litter is great. It's like kind of like it's a really interesting human signifier, because it's not all. It's not all about that. It's more about just trying to sort of see through the cracks in that and look a bit deeper, basically. And ultimately, what I'm really interested in as well is how that material can be kind of translated or transferred into something that maybe somehow might ask people to kind of consider it in a different way, just for a few moments,
And also, I know from the litter that you're particularly interested in, which you've mentioned the sexual act detritus, but also the beer can, or the alcohol can, the NOS canister. It seems to me it's not really the litter; it's the ritual act.
Exactly.
That's of interest there.
Absolutely.
And the stuff is. Well, it's ephemera, but it's a signifier, and then becomes your material for assemblage and for sculpture.
Exactly, it's all about the act that's taking place, and the objects become the artifacts that were just a bit like the way an archaeologist will try and figure out what people did by the artifacts that you come across.
I should just say at this stage, we also don't advocate for tree damage, carving into trees. Poor tree.
Sure. Yeah, but I think it doesn't actually hurt the tree.
Well, we don't know. They haven't told us that.
No, but I think there's a thing called ring. Is it ring fencing or something? Okay. If you make a ring around a tree with a knife, that will kill it.
Right.
Because it needs the bark to take up the water. But if you make a mark in a tree, it's not doing tree any damage.
Okay,
But I'm not. Again,
you put my mind at rest. Yeah. That's okay.
But again, I'm not advocating destroying trees.
No, of course.
But what I am advocating is people making marks. Because it's mark making.
Yeah.
Same as people, painting images on a tree. It's mark making, and it's if it's okay, if it's fine to come across a cave in France, and the marks in there, because they happen to be 50,000 years old, are somehow culturally important. I really would argue that the marks on a tree in a wood are culturally important as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's folk art. I think it's folk art.
So we're coming towards the end of this chat. It's been really good, and I hope people get an insight into what's going to be going on here. And we should talk about that. So we're sort of halfway through week 1. There's 3 weeks here finally in Stoke. How's it going? How are you managing with the social distancing? And it's not an effect on the work.
No, not at all. No. I tend to work. Once in the second stage, I'm pretty much working in a solitary manner anyway, which is how my practice usually evolves. I intend to actually perhaps reference a bit more directly some of the communities that are in a particular site that's really interesting in the city centre. So I'm working on ideas around that right now. But I've been responding to several of the highlighted sites so far. And that's been going really well. And because of my travelling to the gallery and back to the hotel, again on foot or on my bike, it's really opened up new kind of channels and paths and spaces that I can see and would not have known before, such as the canal towpath. It's something that in a city, it's such a it's a very kind of rich space, and it's a very kind of common space in lots of cities in the UK, and it's a space I'd not really considered before. And already over the last couple of days, I've seen aspects of these kind of different communities that again the evidence is there. So that's something that it's leading into something. So I've got my prime sites that I've already marked off. I'm visiting those and responding to those, and also I'm kind of drawing lines in between them based on canal networks, for example.
And then in terms of a response, we were talking earlier about you're working with photogrammetry.
Photogrammetry, yeah.
And other things.
Photogrammetry. Perhaps that being some kind of animation or short moving image piece, but also perhaps casting with the object as well. So referencing an object through photogrammetry and then casting that physically in metal perhaps. And the metal that would be used would be from those artifacts, so drinks cans, aluminium drinks cans, for example. I'm interested in photogrammetry because you can work with extremely delicate objects and materials that you can't really work with any other way. And when I say work, I mean kind of transform it in some way, So I'm interested in not being too kind of museum-like about the way in which I engage with materials. I do quite like to interrupt with them, engage with them quite intensely. Yeah. Interrupt them and sort of destabilize them, so the potential of what can be seen in a different way for them. So the noise canisters, like you mentioned, they're steel, so that's something that I can't physically change because I don't have the technology. But because of this residency, I've now made contact with a foundry that are based in Leicester, and hopefully that will, in the future, that will lead to a bit more of a kind of collaborative and a bit more engagement. So already this residency has led to kind of new possibilities, new ways of working, and of course the great thing is that some of the relationships I've formed with the participants are now kind of becoming more evolved and going off in different directions, which certainly would never have happened had I just approached the residency cold. So it's really sort of shown me how important it is to enact a level of engagement and invite a level of engagement that is not just about knowledge, but is actually about kind of creating a sort of conversation, basically.
Sure. So a singular practice has become a collaborative practice.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I mean, I think it's highlighted the potential in that, but it's also highlighted the fact that my work, although it looks quite like it's this analogy with a sort of archaeologist, looks like I'm quite distant. There is always a kind of a sort of intimacy as well, through objects, really. And that now has been extended into verbal intimacy as well with participants, which is the verbal aspect is the thing that's new. Usually it's been non-verbal.
And in terms of those participants, we're hoping to hold an informal get-together next week.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And those participants and some of our studio artists here are going to come, and we'll chat through your practice and have a Q&A in a socially distanced way. But then at the end of the process, on the 25th of September, we're going to try and do a small presentation exhibition.
Yes,
and we'll use the window, but we'll also use the gallery space and maybe show some of the participants objects and material that you worked with, but also some of the works that you make over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it'll be great to have an exhibition here for the first time in how many months it's been? 6, 7, 8 months.
6 or 7 months. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Well, good luck for the next 2.5 weeks or 2 weeks, and I guess Stoke a chunk better now than you did.
Certainly.
6 months ago.
Yeah,
so,
and it's really eye-opening how large and the scale of the city. How much green
huge.
space it's got, and just to be able to cover that space and feel like I am actually responding to the city. That first phase of the residency has been absolutely vital, and so which is great,
Brilliant. Good luck, Danny, and
Thanks,
I'll see you soon.
Cheers.